flatworm was cut in half. Its tail was placed in a solution that altered its bioelectric field. Now, they didn't touch a single gene. They didn't change a single letter of its DNA. But when that flatworm's head grew back, it belonged to a completely different species. The body had followed the field, not the genome. Now, I know that sounds like pure science fiction, right? But it's not. This happened in a peer-reviewed laboratory at Tufts University led by Dr. Michael Levin. Building on breakthrough discoveries culminating in 2025 and 2026, Levin's team proved something that fundamentally breaks high school biology. Bioelectric fields precede and actually override genetic expression. The DNA literally did not change, but the invisible electrical instructions did. And the punchline of this experiment is absolutely staggering. It turns out organisms are encoding critical, life-defining information completely outside of their genome. The physical, 3D arrangement of life is being controlled by an invisible information field. This is a massive paradigm shift for modern medicine because it tells us that your DNA is really just a parts list. The actual architect putting those parts together, that's bioelectricity. So in this explainer, we're going to roadmap exactly how this works. We'll start by looking closer at that mind-bending flatworm, then explore how this biological software overrides the genetic hardware. After that, we'll dive into morphic resonance, the quantum biology making it all possible, and finally, what this means for reprogramming the human body. All right, let's jump right into part one. The flatworm that broke biology by effectively erasing its own genomic blueprint. So how do they actually pull off this biological hacking? Well, Levin's team had to interrupt the internal electrical network of the worm. First, they used a chemical called octanol to temporarily block what are called gap junctions. You can think of gap junctions almost like little submarine hatches between the cells that allow electrical current to flow. By closing those hatches, they isolated the cells, basically turning off their Wi-Fi. Then, they transiently altered the voltage gradient. When the cells were allowed to regenerate, they consulted this brand new artificial bioelectric field pattern to know what to build. And the anatomy permanently diverged from the DNA. The worm built two heads or even a different species' head simply because the bioelectric field told it to. But here is the craziest part, and it all comes down to this number. 100. That flatworm growing a second head retained 100% identical wild-type DNA as its ancestors. The genome was entirely unedited, yet its physical anatomy was completely transformed. And even wilder, if you took that new two-headed worm and cut it in half again in totally normal water, it would just keep growing two heads. The new shape was stored as a permanent electrical memory, entirely separate from its genetics. Which brings us perfectly to part two. We need to start looking at life through the lens of computation, where the software overrides the hardware to create a cybernetic body. You see, this brilliantly illustrates a massive blind spot in modern medicine. Today's molecular biology is completely obsessed with the hardware. We celebrate things like CRISPR, gene editing, mapping molecular pathways, and all that's great. But as Dr. Levin points out, playing exclusively with the hardware is kind of like trying to reprogram your computer by physically swapping out its microchips. The software, on the other hand, is made of bioelectric fields, spatial blueprints, and voltage gradients. If you really want to change the output, the physical shape of the body, you don't necessarily need to rebuild the hardware. You just rewrite the software. In this system, voltage acts as the ultimate control hub. It's an instructive pattern. This high-level information actually dictates the physical arrangement of molecules across your entire body. So think about the shape of your hands, the structure of your brain, the exact placement of your eyes. It's all being actively managed right now by an electrical network holding your tissues together in a specific target morphology. Okay, to really grasp the magnitude of what we're talking about, we need to escalate into theoretical biology for part 3, morphic resonance made real. Back in 1981, a biologist named Rupert Sheldrake put forward this incredibly controversial hypothesis called morphic resonance. It basically suggests that biological forms are inherited not just through genes, but through a collective memory carried by invisible non-local fields. Now, in this explainer, we're not here to take sides or endorse theories, but we do have to look at how the science is shifting. For decades, mainstream science heavily criticized Sheldrake's idea. And honestly, it made sense why, because the theory completely lacked a tangible physical medium. Critics pointed out there was no known physical mechanism in the body that could possibly store and transmit a non-genetic memory of form. But here's where it gets fascinating. These new discoveries in bioelectricity are dramatically shifting that debate. Biophysicists are now pointing out that Levin's stable, rewritable bioelectric states function precisely as physical memories of form. Think about it. That flatworm storing a two-headed memory in its electrical network and passing it down to its severed clones without ever altering its DNA is demonstrating exactly the kind of field-based collective memory that Sheldrake proposed. Bioelectric networks are finally providing the first tangible, biophysical mechanism for how non-genomic habits can be inherited. But that raises a huge question. How exactly is the body processing all this massive software without instantly blowing the cell's energy budget? Well, that brings us down to part 4, the quantum biology layer. For the longest time, the strict assumption was that cells are purely classical machines. The thought was that the body is just way too warm, wet, and noisy for delicate quantum magic to survive. The problem is, classical biology requires an enormous amount of energy to process the sheer volume of data needed to build and maintain a complex body. Emerging evidence now suggests that cells are actively using quantum phase coherence. Basically, they're taking quantum shortcuts to process vast amounts of biological data with almost zero free energy cost. And we know this isn't just a fun theory anymore. A landmark 2022 study out of the University of Surrey proved that biology actually utilizes quantum tunneling right at ambient, everyday conditions. They found that protons are continuously tunneling back and forth between DNA strands. Now, in classical physics, that absolutely shouldn't happen. Those protons simply do not have the required energy to cross the barrier. But through quantum tunneling, they just pass right through it. It means your body isn't just a giant chemical factory, it is essentially a macroscopic quantum computer processing a highly complex bioelectric blueprint. All right, let's bring all these massive theoretical and quantum concepts right back down to your own tissues for part 5, reprogramming the human body and the era of morphological freedom. Because this is the ultimate endgame of this entire science. Levin calls it an anatomical compiler. Just imagine a future where, instead of trying to painstakingly micromanage individual genes or complex molecular pathways, a doctor simply opens a computer program and draws the large-scale form of the organ or the tissue you need. The compiler would then translate that drawing into the exact bioelectrical stimuli required to literally tell your cells to build it. We're going to stop treating the body like a rigid, dumb machine and start speaking to it like an intelligent, goal-seeking collective. The implications here for regenerative medicine are just off the charts. By accessing this bioelectric software, we aren't just talking about healing a cut a little faster. We are talking about fixing complex birth defects by hitting reset on the electrical target state. We're talking about regrowing entire amputated human limbs, just like a salamander naturally does. We could theoretically reprogram tumors right back into healthy tissue by forcing them to plug back into the body's electrical grid. Ultimately, we are moving past the arbitrary limits that evolution left us with and stepping into an era of true morphological freedom. So take a moment to realize that right now, as you're watching this explainer, an invisible, quantum-assisted electric field is continuously working to hold your exact body together. Your DNA is just the hardware, but your bioelectric field is the software. And the thing about software is, it's designed to be rewritten. So I'll leave you with perhaps the most profound implication in modern medicine. If your shape is truly controlled by a field, and that field is in principle reprogrammable, what will you reprogram first?